Hallo, welkom weer eens aan ons kykers en ons luisteraars. Ons het weer eens 'n lekker gesels saam met Simon Roche wat voorlê. Simon, hoe spreek mens jou van uit? Laat ek dit net eens en vir altyd reg kry en weet ek doen dit reg. Want ek elke keer as ek dit sê dat is dit Roche of is dit Roche?
Dis bloot Roche. Dit is asof dit R-O-S-H gespel was. Jy spreek hom uit asof hy R-O-S-H gespel was. Die E is stil, ja. En daar's ook nie 'n aksent op die E nie. Hy sal net Y wees as hy 'n aksent op hom het. En Roche beteken klip. As jy see toe gaan, sal jy baie geboue op ons kus kry. Lots and lots of blocks of holiday flats from Cape Town all the way up the west coast and East London, Manzimtoti, Umhlanga, called La Rochelle. You'll know that there's a magazine on the racks that your wife looks at.
Yeah.
Called Elle. That means she or her in French. So La Rochelle is the pretty rocks, the girly rocks.
Okay. Yeah.
So it just means rocks, that's all. Roche means rocks, or rock,
ja,
actually.
Dankie Simon, dat jy dit vir my nou uiteindelik helder gemaak het. So ja, welkom Simon Roche, en ek hoop ons het weer eens lekker gesels. Wel, ek hoop nie dit nie, ek weet dit, want dit is altyd lekker en interessant om met jou te gesels, en ek glo jy het 'n hele paar nuwe dinge wat jy met my en dan die kykers en luisteraars mee gaan deel.
Yeah, good evening to you and to Arnold in the studio there with you, who's working on what I sent him yesterday. I hope he's not finding it too challenging because some of the sources are obscure. But anyway, yeah, Marius, there's one thing to talk about today, and that is yesterday's Institute of Race Relations, or for Race Relations, publication of the polls that they conducted in late March and early April. The polls, I gather, ran until fairly recently in terms of days. Absolute earthquake, earth-shattering, huge implications for the country, for the African National Congress, for the Democratic Alliance, and for we conservatives, as conservatives, and then even more so for Suidlanders, who are both conservative and also South Africans, but thirdly, as believers in Sina van Rensburg's prophecies. Incredible. I haven't had the opportunity to complete watching a video on it, but I've read the facts and the figures and the what have you. But I started watching a video about 10 minutes ago. I did an international interview for Suidlanders, and I just had this afternoon, and I just had a short while between the two interviews. As I say, I started watching that video and then ran out of time. But the interviewer says to the expert, Dr. Frans Cronje, is it a bombshell? Is it as much of a bombshell as people are making out, or similar words? And Dr. Frans Cronje, almost laughing, says, yeah, it is. Of course it is. This is flipping earthquake stuff. So I think that's the main thing to talk about. There's lots of other things going on at the moment. We've got Donald Trump, in my opinion, looking for trouble with Iran. All sorts of things going on in the US economy. The world is going half mad, but this is just so big. I mean, really, it warrants the entire program.
Ja, Simon, ek het dit nog nie eintlik gevolg nie, man. Ek moet sê, ek voel nou bietjie soos 'n leekie, so, want ek kan regtig waar nie eintlik saamgesels nie, so sal jy ons lekker die prentjie inkleer van wat was dit gewees en wat is nou die uitslag van dit gewees, want ek is ook nou nuuskierig om te hoor.
Well, the gist of the story is that the ANC has lost ground to the DA.
Okay.
So much so that it is now the second biggest party in South Africa, something that nobody has ever foreseen. Your viewers will remember that 6 years ago we had an election and the ANC got 57%. Then last year the ANC got 40% for the sake of a good round number. Then, a few months ago, the Social Research Foundation, so that was April of last year, 40%. Nobody could believe that the ANC would go from 57 to 40% in the span of 5 years. Incredible, unbelievable. Then the Social Research Foundation, people may or may not remember, did a poll in, I believe, September of last year, and the result was that the ANC support had dropped to 32%.
Sure.
Now, the Social Research Foundation is a worthy entity. They're liberal, they're perverts, but they are scholarly. They do good academic research, for want of a better word, academic. And then the Institute for Race Relations, also liberal, but they do good liberal work, conducted a poll which apparently, I'm a little bit perplexed or bewildered, because in one or two of their graphs, their slides, it suggests that the work began in March. But much of what they say is the cause of this new thing that I'm going to describe, this revelation, is the VAT increase. So the VAT increase only came in 2 weeks ago. I believe it was the Tuesday evening.
Yeah.
So that would be, what is today's date, Marius?
It is
at the risk of asking
die 15de April, Dinsdag, ja.
En vanaand is Dinsdag, so dit sou die 1 April gewees het. Kom ons sê die navorsing het dan geloop tot en met die 10de, ek weet nie. So from late March into April, they conducted this research, and it reveals that if the elections were to be held today, if there were elections, the DA would get 30.3% of the vote, and the ANC would get 29.7% of the vote. It also reveals that ANC support among black voters, up in one of those previous polls, to now 37%. That means that, in rough terms, 2 out of every 3 black people won't vote for the ANC, whereas it was some years ago, a couple of decades ago, at about 70%, in the elections, the ANC got, during Mbeki's time, they got just about 70% of the vote, and vote of that would have been maybe 80 people voting for them.
Yeah.
It's now down to 37 among black voters. Has gone from 5% in one of these previous polls that, I'll just remind listeners if I haven't made it clear, we've got 3 reference points, or 4 reference points. We've got the ANC's support in the elections of 2019, the ANC's support in the elections of April last year, the Social Research Foundation poll of September of last year, and the Institute for Race Relations poll of these recent weeks. So, back to the point, DA support among black voters in one of those polls, I can't remember precisely which one, to now 18%.
Sure.
Among black voters. Now, why this is so important is not because you or I are fascinated by the DA and because we want the DA to do well. We don't like the DA. We don't believe in their abortion policy or their liberalism or their globalism or internationalism. That means nothing to you and me. Why it's a massive subject for us here tonight is because it shows that the ANC is slipping, and it's safe to say there's no reason to believe that they can come back from this. The ANC has done nothing differently as it has lost support. It went from 57% to 40% over 5 years between 2019 and 2024, and you and I never heard that the councillors in the whatever Gharib district were arriving early for work and leaving late and they were even sometimes working on Sundays. You and I never received any reports, any rumors, any hints, any allegations to the effect that the ANC had lifted a finger, so much as a finger, to improve its performance in terms of governance, administration, bureaucracy, technocracy, productivity, or anything similar that might suggest going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So once again, I put it to you, Marius, that nothing is going to change. I know these people well. I have done hundreds of millions of rands worth of work for them. I, for those people who don't know, was a projects manager in what's known as, and it's a bit of a false, overly grand term, the special projects industry, which is live events, but not birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and parties for your dog. It's the launch of the FIFA Football World Cup or the Rugby World Cup or the closing ceremony. Or I did a lot of global broadcasts for MTV. That was kind of one of our things. And I did a number of presidential inaugurations, and I was appointed as the total project manager of the entire Nelson Mandela funeral project 5 years before he died. I know these people. I know them well. They're stupid and... Hello?
Sê, daar is jy weer terug. Ons het jou vir so 5 secondes verloor.
Excuse toch, man, Marius. My point that I'm making is one commentator, one specialist said yesterday, this is not irrevocable or irrevocable as he pronounced it. And I'm not taking issue with the pronunciation. That's petty. That's childlike. But that's the way he said it. I put it to you that it is irrevocable. I put it to you, Marius, that there is nothing that the ANC will do to make this better. They don't have it in them, or they would have shown it, they would have demonstrated it to us long before now. They're going to be just as lazy, stupid, and useless as they've always been, and I really know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so the DA is going to continue to improve in terms of support of South Africans, which leads to the big point for us as Suidlanders. The African National Congress is communist. You will remember that, I'm sure, although you're a bit younger than I, maybe you won't remember it. Nelson Mandela famously denied being a member of the Communist Party repeatedly. Then when he died, it was by his peers that in fact he'd remained a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party up until the day of his death. Oh. The ANC is a wolf in sheep's clothing in that sense. They've done what they've had to do to maintain the support of the world in occupying certain political territory. In other words, if they'd said in the 1980s and the 1990s and the early 2000s, we're communist to the marrow of our bones and we're not going to change, they would have lost all support from the USA and very much European support, even perhaps Russian support, and so on. However, we know from the National Democratic Revolution documentation of the ANC and from colonialism of a special type, their definitions of it and how it functions, that it is a communist organization. End of story.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing, of course, the worst manifestation of it in the Expropriation Without Compensation Act and the forthcoming act due to be passed in October. I want to get the right name. Equal Distribution of Land Act, I think it's called. This is a communist entity. Now, what is my point? My point is that anybody who's familiar with the foundational tenets of communism knows that you don't give it up. The revolution must be permanent. You can never be voted out of office, and you do whatever you have to do to ensure that that doesn't happen. And therefore, for us as Suidlanders, I'm suggesting Not that the sky is going to fall on our heads tomorrow, in the Asterix and Obelix comics. That was in their religion, in the religion of pagan Gaul, pagan France, before the time of Christ. They believed that the worst thing that could happen, and it was going to happen eventually one day, the gods were going to let the sky fall and land on everybody's heads and wipe them out. I'm not saying that there's going to be a terminal catastrophe tomorrow morning before 8 o'clock, and that we should all be hysterical, neurotic, and paranoid. What I am saying is, you can bet your bottom dollar that the ANC is not going to do anything good, healthy, and constructive to win back the support necessary to Africa, but it will, as a matter of certain fact, resort to something destructive, unhealthy, crooked. The writing is on the wall, Marius. If you bet your farm on it, you would only get richer, not poorer.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed that the ANC is now going to resort to dirty tricks in order to maintain power. I forget now when are the municipal elections, but the ANC has an elective conference 2 years, not quite 2 years from now. That's a long time away. And I certainly wouldn't panic over events that are going to happen in 2 years' time, but there will be by-elections and other events that take place on the political terrain in the forthcoming months during the course of this year, in which this support is going to be manifest. It seems as if all of South Africa, including black South Africa, as I said to you earlier, ANC support among black voters has fallen from 50% just a while back to now 37%. And it will continue to fall. So they know that 2 out of 3 of their core constituency doesn't want them. I think that there's going to be hell to pay in this country over the forthcoming months to every shenanigans under the sun to retain power, because they will never, ever allow themselves to give it up. Not as communists, and also not as thieves and robbers.
Ja. Ek stem heeltemal saam met jou, Simon. Dit is ek bedoel daar's seker maar 'n paar Afrika lande wat mense dieselfde kan aan dink van die dictators, soos mense dit nou noem, wat in beheer gekom het en toe dit nooit laat gaan het. Maak nie saak of hulle kamstig nou 'n stemmery gehad het vir 'n presidentsie of wat ook al nie. Daar was altyd een of ander foefie hoe hulle maar die krag en die mag van gebly hou het. So ek stem heeltemal saam met jou. Ek dink ook nie hulle sal dit laat gaan nie. Net vir interessantheid, Simon, daai getalle van wat die ANC nou verloor het ons gesien of die EFF en MK gegroei het saam met die DA as gevolg van daai wat weg is van die ANC af? Of weet jy nie so mooi nie?
No, I do know. I did look at all of the graphs. Yes, there has been marginal improvement. The EFF is back to a good solid 10%. It's not a case of all of that lost support going to the ANC. The MK party has done very well. The IFP benefited. The Patriotic Alliance did well, out of the ANC's loss, and Athol Trollop's party, I can't remember, but you're talking small numbers. So from in the EFF's case, if I remember correctly, it went from 8% or so last year to about 10% now.
Yeah.
So yes, everybody is benefiting, but it's 1.5% here. 0.75% there, because they have so little support. The lion's share of the support is gobbled up by the ANC on practically, for the sake of a round number, 30%. The DA, EFF on 10%. There's already 70% of your electorate.
Yeah.
and the other 30% is taken up by the rats and mice. 5% support, but only in Natal. 6% support, but only in Natal. I'm obviously referring to, or mostly in Natal. I'm obviously referring to MK and the IFP. So yeah, the other parties have gotten marginal improvements, but spread across them it adds up. But for each party, no party has gone from, say, 4.5% in last year's election to now, let's say, 15% or something like that. No, it's 4.5 to 6.3 or whatever.
Ja, nee, dit laat my, ek het nou gedink terwyl jy ook nou gepraat het en net geluister het daaraan en weer teruggedink het wat jy gesê het, hulle gaan definitief nie hulle krag en hulle mag opgee nie. Nou as die luisteraars en die kykers dink die wette wat hulle nou al ingebring het van hierdie grondonteiening en al hierdie goeders is, om die Engelse woord te gebruik, extreem, dan dink net vir jouself, wat gaan hulle doen om mag en krag te kan behou? Wat gaan hulle dan probeer deurdruk? Dit ek sit er om daaraan te dink.
I had a friend, sadly, he's no longer a friend. He made a very big mistake in his life and he's going to pay for it for a long time. But he was a lovely guy, or he is a lovely guy in many ways. And he used to say, verstaan jy nou? If you made a point, so if you explained something to him, you were teaching him, you were educating him, you were showing him, you were explaining to him, he would make out as if he was the one who was showing you.
Yeah.
And he would say, verstaan jy nou? And that's my instinct is to say to you in response to what you've just said, verstaan jy nou, Marius? That is exactly it. You're spot on. You're right on the money.
Yeah.
I think that we are going to sweat bullets. I think that expropriation without compensation is going to come in a big way to shore up ANC support in precisely the same way as ZANU Patriotic Front did regarding the farms beginning in 1997. The year 2000 being kind of the big year, but it went for a few years, that whole thing. And by the way, I'm not stereotypically deprecating, putting down ZANU-PF. I'm not a ZANU-PF fan or a Robert Mugabe fan, but there was more to that story than anybody ever told. In the Lancaster House agreements in advance of Zimbabwean independence, the British promised that they would finance the selling, willing buyer, willing seller, of white-owned farms in Rhodesia. This is Lancaster House time, before the 1980 independence, to black people. And then the British didn't keep their promise. So Robert Mugabe found himself in a very difficult situation because promises had been made to people. And I just mention that in the spirit of fairness and honesty.
Yeah.
That we don't always resort to stereotypes that are not always true just because it suits us. No, we are true conservatives. We should be objective all the time. We should be the most objective people in the world, in any environment. But to get back to the point, I fear that the ANC is rightly, not wrongly, I mean morally wrongly, yes, but correctly, let's say, going to feel that one of the few courses of action open to them is to dish out land and farms and what have you. I think that there are 3 salient courses of action open to them, depending upon circumstances and depending upon timing. I'm not saying that these 3 salient courses of action are equally applicable under every circumstance and in every time period. Number 1 is to cancel elections, defer elections, postpone elections, use your favorite term, when the municipal elections come up. But that's not an immediate thing. A second course open to them is to ride a revolutionary wave, like a surfer riding a wave. In other words, to swim with the current, as in swimming. If you're in a river and you swim with the current, you're going to swim a lot further and faster than if you swam upstream or against the current. In other words, if we have some sort of a catastrophe or a crisis in South Africa, let's say we had a currency crisis, or we had severe blackouts in a cold winter, or there was a crop failure or a massive outbreak of cholera, as I've been trying desperately to point out to people for years now. It's the big unspoken threat in South Africa, is the threat of a major epidemic due to our failing water systems, which are in far worse condition than most people appreciate. Under that circumstance, they may say, oh, this has got nothing to do with us, but yet take advantage of it. In other words, if people become restive and they are unhappy, they point the finger at somebody else and say, well, it's their fault, and, kind of just swim with the revolution. Yeah. I don't think that they're going to, openly call for revolution. So, postponing of elections, taking advantage of a crisis, believing that with sheer numbers, they will win. They'll be the winners in the end. We've got 40 million starving people, 40 million people who are happy to fight for our point of view, 40 million people that we can convince peasants, hoi polloi, the starving masses, the helpless, hopeless, and lost. So we're going to win. And then at the end of it, we'll have power all over again. And the third scenario is, as we've already alluded, where they just say, hey, how well it will work, I think you and I can speculate. But that doesn't mean that they agree with us. We've seen how things went in Zimbabwe. We saw the food crisis, the currency crisis, all of the knock-on effects of the taking of the white farmers' land. But that's not to say that the ANC thinks that they can't get it right, Yeah. So they may well try to just placate the country with land. They wouldn't give everybody land, but they would give the key personnel land. And that would only, there are 25,000 commercial white farmers left in South Africa. There were 120,000 a couple of decades ago. It's been whittled down to about 25,000 according to the 2017 land audit. Obviously, some of those farmers farm huge. They're not just 25,000 commercially viable farms. There might be 50,000 commercially viable pieces of land, where a guy owns 30 farms, 30 cart in transport. You can't farm on 900 hectares as you used to be able to do. I'm talking now about, say, sheep farming. The market has changed. The various technical reasons. Let's say you need a minimum of 3,000. So a guy's got 4 farms that make up about 3,000 hectares. Another guy's got 40 farms that make up 30,000 hectares. So they say, right, the 3,000 hectares, that's feasible. We'll give it to the local gangster. And then the 30 farms, 40,000 hectares, we'll divide those up into 10 and we'll give them to another 10 guys. So their strategy may end up being that something like, I'm making up a number here, that perhaps 50,000 key personnel across South Africa obtain farms in exchange for absolute blind support of the ANC. We demand that you keep Craddock or Hofmeyer or Newcastle or Matatiel, wherever, under control, you as the local warlord or the local robber baron, which is precisely what Zimbabwe attempted to do. There's land robbery wasn't as willy-nilly as the video footage suggested when 30 or 40 thugs with pangas went onto a farm. It wasn't so that each of them would get 1,000 square meters. It was so that the guy who sent them would get everything.
Yeah.
And so it is actually quite strategic. It's not as anarchic as I think that most people believe that it was. It turned out to be anarchic, but there was some strategic thinking behind it. And so that's my fear, Marius, that there is, that the ANC is going to be left with no other way to keep power, but to choose one or more of three very sinister options: stealing elections / postponing elections, fomenting a secret revolution that they just kind of take advantage of, some kind of mass unrest based upon a cholera outbreak or a food shortage or a currency crisis. And third of the three, as I've already described, taking land and giving it to key strategic personnel for their absolute loyalty to the ANC as warlords, who then keep a certain district, the rest of the personnel of a district, another 100 youngsters in a township or whatever, on side for the ANC.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense. I hope I explained it well enough for people to understand.
Nee, definitief, Simon. Ek dink dit gaan 'n kombinasie wees van die drie dinge wat jy dalk genoem het. Hoekom sal jy jou eiers alles in een mandjie sit? Jy gaan dalk so 'n bietjie meer hierdie ene doen, maar hier in die agtergrond die ander ene doen en dalk ek dink die groot moontlikheid van die land begin onteiening en weggee, soos jy sê, vir sleutelpersone is waar ek my geld sal opsit, gaan die grootste vrugte afwerp. So dit gaan teen gebeur, in my opinie natuurlik. Maar ja, dankie Simon, jy het dit mooi opgebreek vir ons, oopgebreek, en nou weet ek ook baie meer as wat ek in die begin van ons gesels geweet het.
It's my absolute pleasure, Marius. These evening chats with you are always thoroughly enjoyable. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday, and depending upon the Russia trip, I've got some ideas for other conversations with you. We'll take it as it comes. We live in very interesting times, and there's a lot to talk about. So see you again on Thursday, and see you next week too. And my regards to Arnold. Bye-bye.
Tot ziens.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Lekker dag. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
Ons het natuurlik nou gesels met Simon Roche, en hy is ons hoof van buitelandse sake, en soos julle ook nou gehoor het, hy gesê, hy gaan miskien een van die dae bietjie in Rusland gaan kuier, opgewonde tye wat daar voorlê vir ons. En as jy nog nie gehoor het van laat ons Rusland toe gaan, of laat Simon laat Simon gaan Rusland toe gaan, en hoekom ons Suidlanders gaan vir hom stuur na Rusland toe, wel hy was genooi, ons stuur hom nie, hy was genooi Rusland toe. Gaan luister gerus Gustav Miller se video op die hoof Suidlander sosiale media kanaal op YouTube veral, en hy verduidelik dit baie mooi, hoekom gaan Simon soontoe, hoekom was hy genooi, en wat gaan doen ons as Suidlanders daar. Van my kant af, ek hoop julle het 'n pragtige dag of aand verder. Totsiens.